The fine showed up in a bright yellow envelope, taped to my front door, $10,000 for unauthorized signage in front yard violating HOA regulations. I stared at it, then down at the two signs planted in my grass. One supporting my wife's city council campaign and the other a support local nurses placard my daughter made. I was still trying to process the absurdity when she showed up again. Tamra Fairgrove, HOA president. 50-something, power-walking clipboard tyrant of the next neighborhood over Summerstone Estates. Not my neighborhood, I live in Maple Glen, no HOA. That was half the reason I bought this house. But that didn't stop Tamra from strutting across my lawn like she owned it. "I warned you last week, Yardley," she said, arms crossed so tight her veins were popping. "Political signs are strictly prohibited under Summerstone's bylaws." I blinked. "Tamra, I don't live in Summerstone, you know that. You're within visual range of our border. This side of the street is a gray area. The committee agrees." "The committee?" I laughed. "You mean those 3 women who meet in your garage and drink boxed wine while pretending to be the Supreme Court?" Her nostrils flared. "This is your official notice. If you don't remove those signs by Friday, we'll begin legal proceedings." I folded the paper slowly and dropped it in my trash bin right in front of her. "Tamra, you're not my HOA. You're not anyone's HOA on this street. Now get off my property." She stormed off, muttering something about entitled men and setting a precedent. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, a contractor showed up claiming he had orders from Summerstone's HOA to remove unauthorized structures. The guy looked confused when I told him to leave before I called the cops. He left, but not before handing me a printed work order. The document had my address but Summerstone's HOA letterhead. I started digging. Within an hour, I was on the county assessor's website printing property maps. Surprise, Summerstone Estates ends 5 houses before mine. I highlighted the boundary in red. Then I looked up the HOA's registration info. Their jurisdiction didn't include my street. Never had. I called the registrar. "Can an HOA find someone who doesn't live in their community?" The guy on the phone laughed so hard I had to wait for him to catch his breath. "Absolutely not. That's not even legal. That's harassment." Exactly what I needed to hear. I mounted a camera on my porch, printed a giant copy of the county assessor's map and stapled it to a wooden post next to the signs in my yard. On top of it, I wrote, "Not your HOA. Not your rules." That afternoon, Tamra showed up again with 2 of her committee members. One of them kept filming with her phone. Tamra pointed at the sign. "This is defamation." "No," I said, still holding the county map. "This is public record. You're about to learn what defamation actually is. When I file my harassment claim." She barked a laugh. "You think you can scare me?" "My husband's a lawyer." "Oh, good," I said. "Then he can explain to you why impersonating a legal authority, issuing fraudulent fines, and attempting unauthorized access to private property is a felony." Her face went pale. That finally shut her up, but I wasn't done. The next morning, I drove down to City Hall with a folder full of documents and a coffee that tasted like revenge. My first stop was the zoning office. I needed to make sure I hadn't missed some obscure municipal loophole that Tamra could exploit. The clerk, a guy named Martin with wireframe glasses and a tie that hadn't been in style since the Bush administration, pulled up the digital maps and cross-referenced them against HOA filings. "You're on Maple Glen Drive," he asked, squinting at the monitor. "Yep." "House number 32. He clicked around for a bit and shook his head. "Nope. You're well outside Summerstone's jurisdiction. They've got a hard boundary at East Ridge Avenue. Nothing beyond that's included in their covenants." "You're clear." "Any chance they've petitioned for an annexation?" I asked. Martin gave me a look like I'd just asked if I could adopt a bald eagle. "They'd need to submit a proposal, get signatures from 75% of affected homeowners, and go through a public hearing." "That hasn't happened, and I'd know. I process those." I thanked him, grabbed a certified copy of the zoning map and jurisdictional records, and headed to the city attorney's office. The assistant there was more than helpful after I showed her the fraudulent fine notice and the contractor's removal order with my address. Her eyebrows climbed halfway up her forehead. That's not just overreach, that's impersonation of authority. Can the city do anything about it? I asked. She nodded slowly. Send us everything you have. We can refer this to the city prosecutor. In the meantime, I'd recommend filing a police report. That work order could be considered attempted trespassing under false pretenses. The moment I walked into the police station lobby, I spotted Officer Ramirez, the guy who patrolled our neighborhood. We'd talked before mostly about speeding complaints and the occasional loose dog. "Yardley," he said, coming over. "Heard you had some excitement down on Maple Glen." I handed over the documents. "They sent a contractor to my house with forged HOA paperwork. Claimed they had authority to remove items from my property." Ramirez flipped through the stack, his expression going from casual to cold. "You're telling me they issued a removal order for a property they don't govern?" "Exactly." He took out his radio and asked dispatch to flag a report for fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted trespass. Then he asked if I had video footage. Front porch cam caught the contractor. "I'll email it to you." "Good," he said. "We'll investigate. If this HOA president really orchestrated this, she's looking at some serious charges." That night, I reviewed the footage again, frame by frame. I didn't recognize the contractor, but his van had a company name, Precision Property Services. A quick search turned up a website and a phone number. I called. "Yeah," the voice on the other end sounded tired. "This is Derek Yardley. You sent someone to my house on Maple Glen to remove signs." Long pause. "I didn't send anyone. Wait, Maple Glen, that's not even in Summerstone." "Right, but your guy had a work order with my address." He let out a low whistle. "Okay, that's not good. We do some work for Summerstone's HOA, but only within their properties. I'll look into who authorized that and get back to you." 10 minutes later, he called back. "Looks like Tamra Fairgrove contacted my office directly. Said she was acting on behalf of the HOA and that your property was under their control due to an oversight in registration. I assigned the job to a new guy who didn't think to double-check. You realize that could have gotten your company sued?" "Believe me, I do now. We'll issue a formal apology and send you a written statement confirming we were misled." I sent everything to Officer Ramirez and the city attorney. The next morning, I got a call from Assistant Prosecutor Lee Drummond. "Mr. Yardley, we've reviewed your materials. We're opening an investigation into Summerstone HOA for fraudulent enforcement actions. This could move into criminal territory depending on what we find. Do I need to do anything else? For now, just keep everything documented. And if she contacts you again, let us know immediately." But Tamra didn't just contact me, she doubled down. By the weekend, flyers started appearing on doorsteps up and down Maple Glen. They were printed on glossy paper with bold red letters at the top reading, "Protect our neighborhood values." Below that, a list of alleged violations committed by me, including the signs, improper lawn slope, and unregistered political activity. I was stunned, then furious, then motivated. I held a neighborhood meeting, not at my house, too small. We used the community center off Brookfield Avenue. I posted signs, printed leaflets, even offered free coffee and donuts. 43 people showed up, including 3 folks from Summerstone who'd had their own run-ins with Tamra. I stood at the front with a projector screen and laid everything out. The fake fine, the forged work order, the contractor's statement, the city documents, the police report. People gasped. One woman dropped her coffee, then I brought up the flyers. "This is not just harassment," I said. "It's libel, and it's coordinated. She's trying to assert control over a neighborhood that never agreed to her authority." A man in the back raised his hand. "Can an HOA president even do that?" "Not legally," I said, "but if no one pushes back, she gets away with it." "That ends now. We voted, right then and there, to form a neighborhood committee, not an HOA, just a group to represent our street's interests. I was nominated to chair it. We called ourselves the Maple Glen Alliance. One of our members, an ex-paralegal named June, offered to help draft a cease and desist letter. Another neighbor, Marcus, was a freelance journalist. He started putting together a piece for the local paper. That night, I got an email from Lee Drummond. "I thought you'd like to know Tamra Fairgrove was served today with a notice of investigation. We've also frozen her HOA's ability to issue fines or initiate enforcement actions pending the outcome." I didn't cheer. I smiled. Then I got to work scanning the latest flyer. Tamra had crossed a new line. She'd included a cropped photo of my daughter holding the nurse support sign. That was enough for a civil suit, and I knew exactly who to call. My brother-in-law, Grant, was a civil litigation attorney in Phoenix. He owed me a favor, and he didn't like bullies. Grant flew in the next evening, briefcase in hand and jaw set like he was walking into a courtroom brawl. He stepped onto my porch, glanced at the flyer I'd pinned to the inside of my storm door, and let out a low breath. "She put a child's face on political propaganda," he said, flipping the flyer over. "This woman's either reckless, stupid, or both. She thinks she's untouchable," I said. "Well," Grant said, "let's test that theory." We set up a temporary war room in my dining area, pushing aside the table and laying out documents across 2 folding tables. Grant brought his portable scanner, a legal pad the size of a pizza box, and a wireless printer that looked like it had seen combat. June joined us after dinner, bringing hard copies of the cease and desist we drafted, and a stack of HOA newsletters she'd collected from her friend over in Summerstone, a friend who just resigned from their communications committee after finding out how deep Tamra's personal vendettas went. Grant leafed through them, eyes narrowing. "She's been using HOA funds to print personal opinion pieces," he said, pointing at a paragraph where Tamra claimed outsiders were eroding the moral standards of Summerstone. "This isn't just poor judgment. If these were funded with community dues, it's misappropriation. If she authorized a contractor to act outside her jurisdiction, it's impersonation, and if she distributed that flyer to minors." He trailed off, tapping his pen on the edge of the table. June nodded. "She left one at my niece's house. She's 15. Grant looked over at me. "We're filing a civil suit for defamation and invasion of privacy on behalf of your daughter, but I'm also contacting the district attorney's office." This is going to escalate. The next morning, Grant and I met with Detective Havorson at the police station. Ramirez had already looped him in. Havorson was a 40-something with a graying beard and a voice like sandpaper. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your HOA friend's been busy," he said, flipping open a manila folder. "We've had 3 complaints from Summerstone residents in the last week. 2 claim she forged signatures on internal votes to approve new enforcement measures. One says she threatened to report a neighbor to Child Protective Services over a lawn dispute." Grant didn't blink. "We're adding criminal impersonation, unauthorized surveillance. She had someone follow Derek's wife to her campaign event and violation of state privacy laws. She used a child's image without parental consent." Havorson raised his eyebrows. "You're sure?" I pulled out a printout of the flyer, then showed him a time-stamped photo of the original sign my daughter had made. Same pose, same clothes, cropped from my front yard camera footage. "She either trespassed or coerced someone else to take the photo," I said. "We have the camera logs, no authorization, no consent." Havorson leaned back. "Okay, that changes things." He called in Sergeant Lyall, who handled digital forensics. They began cataloging the evidence. Meanwhile, Grant made a formal referral to the state attorney general's office. He wasn't playing around. By the end of the day, Tamra's world was starting to crumble. The city posted notice that Summerstone's HOA privileges were suspended pending investigation. They could no longer issue fines, file liens, or conduct enforcement actions. Her access to the association's funds was frozen by court order, and an official inquiry was launched into the HOA's financial records, dating back 5 years. That night, I received a message from a man named Alan Westerbrook. He introduced himself as a former board member of Summerstone's HOA who'd quit last year after what he called questionable reallocations. She moved $10,000 from our maintenance budget into an administrative reserve with no vote, he said when we met the next morning at a cafe. I asked to see the ledger. She said it was confidential. Next month, she printed a newsletter accusing me of undermining community trust. I resigned. I didn't have the fight in me then. Do you have documentation? Grant asked. Alan slid over a thumb drive. I've been collecting copies of everything. Meeting minutes, memos, expense reports. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Until now. Grant plugged the drive into his laptop, brows furrowed as he scrolled. She used community aesthetic improvement funds to pay for a brick patio in her backyard, he muttered. Filed under common use landscaping. She also paid her niece's printing company for flyers, Alan added, double the rate of the previous vendor. Grant looked up. You just became our star witness. Over the next 48 hours, the dominoes fell fast. The local paper ran Marcus's exposé on Tamra's overreach, complete with quotes from residents who'd been fined for things like excessive wind chimes or emotionally disruptive yard art. A retired Air Force colonel down the block recounted how she tried to fine him for flying an American flag on a pole she claimed was visually combative. Then came the tipping point. A city auditor revealed that Tamra had submitted forged invoices to justify a sidewalk repaving project that never happened. The check had gone to a shell company registered under her nephew's name. When confronted, the nephew confessed. Tamra had recruited him during a family cookout. The DA's office filed charges within the week: fraud, misappropriation of funds, criminal impersonation, harassment, use of a minor's image in political materials without consent, and a pending federal inquiry for mail fraud due to her use of HOA newsletters to distribute defamatory materials. The day she was arrested, half the neighborhood gathered outside to watch. No one cheered. No one jeered, just silence. A few people shook their heads. One man clapped once slowly, like it was the final act of a play. She was led out of her house in a navy pantsuit, sunglasses on, lips pressed into a line. The same contractor who'd come to my house weeks before stood across the street watching it unfold. When our eyes met, he gave a slight nod. Grant and I sat on my porch that evening, the last of the sun painting the sky amber. She'll probably take a plea deal, Grant said, but the civil suit's just starting. Between you, your daughter, and the other residents, she's going to be paying for this for a long time. She'll never hold a board seat again, I said, or any position with fiduciary responsibility, he added. You exposed her, Derek. And more importantly, you protected your neighborhood. I looked out at the lawn where the sign still stood, untouched now. The support local nurses sign had faded a little, edges curled from the heat, but it stayed. We didn't need guards or gates or bylaws to protect our street. We just needed each other, and the guts to say no, loud enough that someone finally listened. The court date landed on a Tuesday. By then, the headlines had spread beyond our county. Local radio ran a segment about HOA tyranny in suburbia, and a regional podcast interviewed Marcus about the neighborhood fallout. Tamra's face, once a staple of Summerstone's newsletters next to recipes for lemon bars and warnings against yard clutter, now appeared beside phrases like fraud charges and abuse of authority. Grant and I arrived at the courthouse early. He walked me through the seating plan and made sure the civil filing was locked in with the clerk. My daughter stayed home that day. She didn't need to see what was coming, though she'd given me one request: make sure Tamra didn't get to pretend it was all a misunderstanding. Courtroom 3 was packed. Not just with press and attorneys, but with residents Maple Glen, Summerstone, even a few from neighboring developments who'd heard what happened and wanted to see how it ended. Tamra's legal team entered first. 3 suits, all private counsel, none of them her husband. That told us enough. She followed, flanked by one of the attorneys. Her eyes darted around the room, resting briefly on me, then skipping over to the prosecution's table. She looked thinner. Not physically, her posture had diminished. Gone was the iron-backed woman who once marched across my lawn with a clipboard like she commanded the sky. Now, she moved like someone trying to navigate a floor she no longer trusted. The judge called the court to order, and the state began laying out the criminal charges. Each one backed by documents from the city auditor, testimony from Allen, and digital records from the contractor's office and HOA expense accounts. When they got to the shell company, the courtroom went still. Grant slid me a copy of the ledger, 8 payments over 6 months, each labeled under vague line items like beautification initiatives and community resilience. The total added up to more than $30,000. Tamra's attorneys didn't refute the payments. They argued that she acted in good faith under the assumption that her role granted her discretionary powers. But the prosecution had receipts, literally, showing her signature on invoices submitted under a false address. When the judge finally asked if she wished to make a statement, Tamra stood slowly. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I believed I was protecting the values of our neighborhood. I see now that I overstepped. The judge didn't blink. Mrs. Fairgrove, this court is not concerned with personal interpretations of authority. It is concerned with the law. She was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest, 2 years of probation, and a mandatory audit of all HOA practices under her tenure. The judge also barred her from holding leadership positions in any community organization involving finances or governance for a minimum of 10 years. Grant leaned back in his chair. "It's not prison," he said, "but it's permanent exile from the sandbox she built." Outside, reporters swarmed the steps. I kept my head down and walked past them toward the parking lot where June and Allen were waiting. "She's done," June said. "Summerstone's board dissolved last night. Emergency vote. They're petitioning the city to transition into a voluntary association with no enforcement powers." Allen added, "and they're offering refunds on the last 2 years' worth of fines." I exhaled through my teeth. "That's going to sting. They already have 27 requests," he said, "and that's just from this morning." Back home, the Maple Glen Alliance met in June's backyard, folding chairs, a fire pit, and a whiteboard that read "Next Steps." We didn't need to do much. The signs stayed up. No longer symbols of defiance, but reminders that boundaries matter, and not just the kind you paint on a map. Marcus announced he was putting together a neighborhood history project, documenting everything from the earliest property records to Tamra's downfall. "Not to gloat," he told the group, "but because people forget fast, and if we don't write this down, someone else might try it again someday." Grant returned to Phoenix the following week. Before he left, he handed me a sealed envelope. "For your daughter," he said. "It's a copy of the judgment. She should know her sign didn't just survive, it changed something." The civil suit settled quickly. Tamra's team didn't want a trial, not with the press circling like crows. She issued a formal apology to my family, paid damages, and agreed to a permanent no-contact order. The judge also ordered her to fund a community civics workshop for local teens. I made sure it included a unit on homeowner rights. One evening, while raking leaves, I spotted Ramirez pulling up in his cruiser. He stepped out and nodded toward the yard. "Quiet now," he said. "First time in months." He reached into the passenger seat and pulled out a manila folder. "Figured you'd want to see this. Final report from the city attorney's office. It's official. Maple Glen is not and has never been under HOA jurisdiction." I took the folder, flipped it open, and smiled at the stamped seal. "Think she believed it ever was," Ramirez shrugged. "Doesn't matter now." "You made it clear." As he drove off, I walked back to the porch and leaned against the railing. Across the street, a kid rode a scooter down the sidewalk past 3 homes with handmade yard signs. None of them matched. One had a rainbow. Another had a dog in sunglasses. The third just said, "Vote local." I let the rake fall beside me and sat down. It wasn't about signs. It was about the right to plant them, paint them, build them, or not, without fear that someone with a clipboard and a grudge could dictate how your life should look. You didn't just stop Tamra. We made sure no one like her would ever try again, and all it took was refusing to move the sign.